Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're at in the world. We're so grateful that you've joined us for this webinar, another Sawtooth Software webinar entitled Aligning Customer and Internal Priorities Using MaxDiff. This is going to be a great webinar. We're grateful that you joined us. We will be recording this webinar, so if you have registered for the webinar, you will be getting a link to the recording a few days from now. So look in your inboxes on Monday or Tuesday of next week for a link to the recording. We'd encourage you to ask questions during the webinar. You can do so by clicking on the Q&A link at the bottom of your Zoom interface. We'd encourage you to use the Q&A link, not the chat. And we will be able to answer your questions during the webinar, and then we'll answer more of them towards the end. I'm here with both Bryans from Sawtooth Software, Bryan Orme and Brian McEwen. Brian will be presenting, and then Brian McEwen and I will be helping answering questions during the presentation. Okay, well, I would like to introduce you to our speaker, Bryan Orme. He is the president and CEO of Sawtooth Software. And at Sawtooth, we are a research analytics company and have been in business for over 40 years. If you don't know much about us, I encourage you to check us out. Bryan has written 2 books on content analysis and co-authored a book on MaxDiff. He's also an avid researcher who frequently writes articles and presents at conferences on research methods for insights and marketing research. So we're excited to have Bryan here with us today. He's a very smart, very great presenter, and take it away, Bryan.
All right. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This is going to be a fun session. We're going to talk about what to do about aligning customer and internal priorities using MaxDiff. Customers want things, but obviously the internal stakeholders, the CEO, the C-suite, the marketing manager, these individuals who are heavy hitters within an organization also have their thoughts about what we should do. And as a product manager or as a strategy person or a person in insights, you often are dealing with these 2 different groups, customers and your internal stakeholders and internal leaders. And you want to make sure that they get them on the right page. And especially you want to make sure that your internal stakeholders understand what customers want and that you can show it to them in a very compelling and an intuitive way, like a quadrant type analysis that managers are used to. So on the agenda today is we're going to introduce you to MaxDiff, also known as Best Worst Scaling. It was developed in the late 80s by choice analysis pioneer Jordan Louvier. We're going to show results from a real case study involving product features for the next version of an analytical software package developed by a SaaS company, us, Sawtooth Software. This is our internal work. This is work that we do to interview our customers and for our product manager to work with the stakeholders to try to see what customers prioritize, what stakeholders prioritize, how much things cost to develop, and how to bring us all onto the same page for a good solution. We're going to demonstrate how quickly and easily MaxDiff can be executed using Sawtooth Software's Discover online survey platform. I'll be showing that near the end of this presentation. So back to our problem at hand, getting customers and internal stakeholder alignment. It's, of course, good to ask questions and to listen to our customers. We're trying to please them. We're trying to create the products and services that are going to help us win in the competitive environment. How do we do that if we're not asking questions and listening to customers? And it's good to have your internal stakeholders, and they also have expertise, they have experience, they know something about the cost of delivering product and service features and the firm's strategy. Both of these perspectives are important. Now, how do we go about quantifying the importance of features to people? Well, for decades, political science and social science and market researchers have looked for ways to quantify how important or preferred things are to people. And I'm sure that you've done this a lot in your career as a researcher, a user experience researcher, a marketing scientist, a strategy individual. you're asking questions about how important things are or what people like. And typically, you've probably been using a rating scale for much of this research. Rating scales do have problems, though, that I'm going to highlight. Number one, a lack of discrimination in the ratings. And number two, scale use bias. Regarding lack of discrimination, the typical rating scale is the 5-point scale. You may also favor a 4-point or a 7-point or a 10-point scale. No matter what you use, typically you're going to see a lot of bias towards respondents just saying that everything's important to them. Respondents find these very easy and quick to fill out, but at the same time, respondents engage in a lot of lazy behavior. They tend to just say everything's important, and they don't really think about how much more important something is than another thing. Another problem with rating scales is something called scale use bias. It turns out that people from different cultures, different educational background, and maybe just their personalities, they just use rating scales differently. It has been found that people, for example, from the USA and Germany tend to use lower numbers on the scale on average than people from, for example, India or South America. Some cultures have people that tend to want to be more agreeable, and some cultures have people who tend to want to be more realistic and don't care as much as whether they're as agreeable to you or not. This makes it hard to compare people's answers, especially with cross-cultural research projects, if they're just using the scale differently. So we're going to talk about MaxDiff, which cuts through both of these problems. Over the last 20 or so years, best-worst scaling, or MaxDiff, has emerged as the best way to get good discrimination among the items and to avoid scale use bias, making it much more reliable and conclusive to compare results across people who use the scales differently, especially for cross-cultural research. MaxDiff is also a great technique when you're interviewing people who aren't necessarily very good at rating scales, including young children and cognitively challenged elderly. So let's think about the data, and let's think about a MaxDiff where we're going to situate it as choices among 3 items. Now, typically in a study where we're trying to learn about what's important to customers, and we're going to be talking about a case study where Sawtooth Software, our product manager, wanted to learn what was important for our customers for an upgrade to our analytical software package, Lighthouse Studio. We had a list of 27 items, but it's real typical to have a list of anywhere from 10 to 20 items. Well, you have 10 or 20 items that you want to study, but we're not going to bombard the respondent with all 20 or all 10 items at the same time. We're going to break it up into manageable little chunks, like 3 items at a time. And we'll show a question that says something like this: among these 3 features, which is most important and least important when considering an electric vehicle to buy? And this respondent happens to say that reliability is the most important to them and brand name is the least important to them when considering an electric vehicle to buy. Now think about the information that we gain when a respondent tells us this. We know that reliability is more important than brand name and driving range. And we also know that driving range is more important than brand name. From just those 2 clicks, we learned about 3 paired comparison inequalities. And we didn't let the respondent just straight line us or be lazy. We didn't let them just say everything was important. We said, hey, you need to tell us what's most important and what's least important. And in this example, we're going to repeat this type of question for 3 more choice tasks, which rotate across all of the items in our study. This study only has 6 items, and this is the study that we're going to program at the end in Discovered Platform. Now, let's say that we had some more items and we wanted to show 4 at a time. We might show 4 questions at a time. MaxDiff works well, whether we're showing 3 items at a time, 4 items, 5 items at a time. Typically, the more complex and in terms of the number of words in the items, we don't want to show too many items at a time. But the items can also be graphics. We might be asking people to trade off different graphical representations for product design, for example. If a respondent says brand name is most important and driving range is least important in this question showing 4 items, then we learn about 5 of these paired comparisons from just 2 clicks. So in a very real way, MaxDiff is a quicker, faster way to collect the powerful paired comparisons data that have been used for decades. Okay, moving along. Let's think about how we bring these items together in these MaxDiff questions. Obviously, we're just not going to do it willy-nilly or randomly. We want each item to appear approximately an equal number of times for each respondent and across respondents, and to keep it a fair and balanced experiment so that we can statistically tease out the importance or preference of each item independent of the others. We want each pair of items to appear an equal number of times together in MaxDiff sets, or very close to it. Furthermore, to avoid kind of the bias that might occur if a particular item always appeared at the top of each triple, we're going to make sure that each item appears about an equal number of times in the first position, the second position, and in the bottom position in the MaxDiff tasks. And good software handles all these details. So I'm not going to talk very much about statistics, but the little bit about statistics that we will talk about are how we estimate the preference scores or the importance scores. We could just count the number of times each item wins across these exploded paired comparisons that I've shown you, and that's pretty good. But we can get even more precision and better predictive validity from our scores if we fit a multinomial logistic regression to estimate the importance weights for the items. And again, good software does all that heavy lifting. You just click a few buttons. You can do even better than the straightforward multinomial logistic regression model if we estimate a hierarchical Bayesian logistic regression model. And this is the gold standard, and it tends to work great for this research. And this is the approach that's automatically built in by default in Sawtooth Software's Discover platform for MaxDiff. We can get really good results via hierarchical Bayesian estimation as long as each item is seen at minimum 1 time per respondent and preferably 2 to 3 times per respondent. So how do we interpret these MaxDiff scores that come out of the hierarchical Bayesian multinomial logistic regression? Well, Sawtooth Software's Discover platform puts them on a ratio scale such that the items sum to 100. So this makes it really easy to present to managers. Managers are really accustomed to getting an array of items where the importance scores sum to 100. It's kind of expected. It makes it super easy to interpret the MaxDiff data. If an item gets a 10, you know that it's twice as important or twice as preferred as an item that got a 5, and the items sum to 100. Now, how many items should we show per set? I hinted at this before. If the text is relatively short, or if we're using graphical items, then showing 4 or 5 items per MaxDiff set works really well. And just make sure that you don't show more than half as many items in each set as there are in your MaxDiff experiment, because that would be counterproductive. Imagine that we had 8 total items that we were studying. If you were to show 5 or 6 of those 8 every time, that would be counterproductive because most of the time the person's best and potentially worst items would occur. And so you'd be learning a lot about best and worst items, but you wouldn't learn very much about the middle. So if you have 8 items in your study, you don't want to show more than 4 items at a time in each set. And generally, we just don't recommend showing more than 7 items per set. It just overwhelms the respondent, and research results just don't turn out as well. We've tested this a few times, both with real respondents and also with robotic respondents. Okay, now on to the case study involving Sawtooth Software's product. We have a legacy Windows-based analytical and software engine called Lighthouse Studio. Many of you are familiar with Lighthouse Studio on this webinar. Now, we every year are developing new versions of Lighthouse Studio to release, and we naturally want to know what our customers are interested in putting into it. And of course, internally, me included, I'm one of the stakeholders. I'm a Lighthouse Studio user, and I have things that I'd like to see. And I'm the boss at Sawtooth Software, so when I get in meetings, I might pound my fist and have my desires, and I might not necessarily be as willing to compromise and think about what the customers want or what our other internal stakeholders want. I'm not that bad, but you can imagine a CEO who's really into the product who might do that. So, a little bit of background on this case study. Sawtooth Software, our company, was founded in 1983. We have a survey software platform that specializes in feature and pricing optimization, but of course it also does general surveys. Each year, we conduct a customer feedback survey, which is a good opportunity for us to assess what features and improvements to put in the next version of Lighthouse Studio, which is our legacy Windows installed platform that so many of you perhaps on this call use. Notice we're not talking about our new web-based platform, Discover, that I'm going to be talking about later today, but this case study involves our legacy Windows installed platform, which continues to be alive and well, and we are going to keep Lighthouse Studio going for many, many years because so many people have fallen in love with it and just like it. It works well for them. So we have 27 features to study. How did we come up with these features? Well, it was based on years of previous user feedback, because annually we do our feedback survey where we ask open-ended questions about what people are missing in our software and hoping to see that we would do to improve our software. We also have our technical support team. We have a wonderful technical support team at Sawtooth Software, does a fantastic job, and they listen to customers day in and day out. And they obviously chime in with what they think are the biggest opportunities, but also problems to address in the previous version of the software. We also have our marketing and sales team who talk to customers and potential customers about our product. We have the product manager himself who directs the work in our Scrum team. We do Agile Scrum development here. And we have the executive committee, and I'm on the executive committee, and I'm quite interested to see what goes into Lighthouse Studio. So some of the 27 items are listed here. And for some of you, this may seem really weird, and you may not be familiar with Lighthouse Studio, but believe me, Lighthouse Studio customers know what these items generally mean, and they have ideas about them and preferences. So, when we asked this customer feedback survey, this would be now about 9 months ago, we asked respondents to tell us among these potential developments below, which would be the most valuable and the least valuable to them for Lighthouse Studio. We asked 15 questions showing 3 items at a time. Now, in terms of how long it took our respondents to do this survey, it took a median of 4.2 minutes of time for respondents to do all 15 MaxDiff questions. You know, about 4 minutes. But in our experience, these respondents took longer than typical respondents. I think that our respondents, being researchers themselves, really care about the data, and they take additional time. It took about 27 minutes, 28 minutes for respondents on average to answer the first MaxDiff question. And then as they got warmed up, it sped up to about 11 seconds per question at the end. You'll see respondents go a little bit faster than this. And also, MaxDiff provides a really good way in hierarchical Bayesian estimation to figure out whether respondents are being good, consistent respondents, or are just answering somewhat haphazardly or purely randomly. There's a fit statistic that comes out of hierarchical Bayes that is very good within MaxDiff for culling the respondents who are answering mostly randomly. So when the software initially reports to you the average hierarchical Bayesian logistic regression importance scores, The bigger the score, the more important it is, and the software arranges them from most important to least important. And to make things a lot easier to show on the screen, we're going to be referring to these 27 items as capital A through lowercase a letters. But I'll give you a sense for what the two most important items were for customers to see in the upgrade for Lighthouse Studio. They said that they would be most interested in getting a MaxDiff utility report, MaxDiff simulator, and turf in Lighthouse Studio on the desktop. Right now, the simulator, the utility report, the turf optimization, that's available in the online MaxDiff analyzer, which you can upload your data to use it in, but it's not available yet in the desktop in the Lighthouse Studio platform on the desktop. So they said, hey, it'd be really good to have it there. Number two for them was seamless multilingual support, toggle between language, all within the same survey. Lighthouse Studio can do multilingual surveys, but it breaks the project into a different data set per survey, per language. And it might be more convenient for people to have it all together addressed in the same data set rather than having to stitch it together afterwards. Now, the least important two items were item I, a calendar question, or item Y, to add granular permission levels for users in the admin module. Now then, we asked the very same MaxDiff survey to 8 stakeholders, and I was one of these 8 respondents. You can get very good results with MaxDiff if your sample size, if your universe to study is only 8 people. If you ask all 8 people that are in your universe what they think via MaxDiff, you'll get great results. And we got good results here. And of course, the question is, do they line up very well with what customers think? I was one of these stakeholders, the product manager, people from our technical support team, people from our analytical group. We had, and I think even one of the main developers, one of the main software developers were one of these stakeholders. Now, it turns out when we look at the MaxDiff scores from the stakeholders, the internal stakeholders at Sawtooth Software, they thought that the most important thing was Z, crosstab analysis in Lighthouse Studio's desktop platform. You can do some cross tabulation up in the admin module online, but you can't do it yet on the desktop when you bring your data down in that legacy Lighthouse Studio tool. W was the second most important thing for the internal stakeholders, the ability to access data in real time for building real-time dashboards using Power BI, Tableau, Domo, etc. via the APIs. And you can also see the 2 least important Y and N items for stakeholders. So the million-dollar question is, how do these line up, stakeholder preferences and customer preferences? We can do a simple scatter plot of these MaxDiff scores. Now, from north to south, you got the 160 users that we surveyed. These are not obviously all of our users. We sampled among our Lighthouse Studio users, and of course, not all of our Lighthouse Studio users responded. And so we got a pretty ample sample size for MaxDiff of 160 respondents when looking at users. And then we've got from east to west the scores for the stakeholders. And the first thing you notice is that there's a slight positive correlation, which is good. It would be really bad if it was a negative correlation, if the stakeholders thought oppositely in general from the users. In general, there's some agreement, but the correlation is only 0.35, which if you look it up in stats book, will say that that's kind of a low positive correlation. So this leads to some interesting questions. Where do users and stakeholders tend to agree? And where are they not agreeing? And what can the stakeholders, what can we as Sawtooth Software learn from thinking about those differences to maybe update our thinking? So a simple way to tackle this is just to highlight the top 10 items that the users think are most important to put in the next version of the software. And then to look at the top 10 that the internal stakeholders think, and to see where the overlap is. Now, the overlap occurs in G, T, A, and C. Both groups tend to agree that items G, T, A, and C are important to do. And so this is good. This is an area where you can say, hey, we both agree on this. And so we should really think about the importance of doing those things. But at the same time, you wonder, well, some of these things are easier to do, are more expensive for the organization to do than others. How do we bring that to bear into this decision? And so what we did is among these software developers and the product manager, that's a 4-person team, they sat down and talked for a few hours about each item. And the product manager explained to the software developers, okay, this item needs to have this and this and this. It involves these existing components. It involves this thing that has to be done new. They talked it through to make sure that they could get a good feel for how hard it would be or how costly it would be to our firm to put this in our product. We could have done a MaxDiff and asked our team of 4 here to say which was most expensive and least expensive to put into the software. But our group of 4 are very familiar with and regularly rate the difficulty of doing things on a 5-point scale. And we're not dealing with scale use bias, and our folks internally are not going to just straight line us with 5 and 4s. So we decided that we would ask them to use a 5-point scale and to make sure to put some items on each point of the scale in terms of how difficult or expensive it is for our firm to put these features into our product. And we decided to color code them. Now, this is the same scatter plot that I showed you before with user importances north to south, stakeholder importances or preferences east to west. And now we've color coded each of the items in terms of how costly it is for the organization or difficult in terms of time to put it into the software. Difficult being dark red to easy being dark green and everywhere in between. Now, you can imagine that this is probably a pretty insightful thing. I've also got a dotted line here, which is a least squares fit. Using a regression as if these are linear, if this is a linear relationship. The more aligned that the users and the stakeholders are, the closer items are to that least squares fit line, and the less aligned that we are, the further the items are from that dotted line. So then, now internally we sit down and the product manager shows the stakeholders and the team, the development team, this chart as we talk about what should we prioritize and put into the next versions of the software. And you can imagine how this might apply to your business or to customers that you are consulting if you're a consulting company. It's just a simple kind of quadrant analysis. You want to be thinking about the things that are on the upper right, particularly, especially where there's agreement. And you want to be thinking about those gimmies, those easier items that maybe are popping out in green or maybe moderate difficulty in yellow that are occurring in the upper right of the quadrant. It turns out that T is a feature that our team has already decided to implement a few months before we fielded the study. So we felt some validation that T was a good way to go. It's a somewhat difficult thing to accomplish, but it was very important to both users and stakeholders. And G was an item that for many years we just said we didn't want to do because it was too hard to do. But the fact of the matter is that users thought it was number 2 in terms of the 27 items on their list of what they think we should do. So we're really reconsidering to do that. P, look at item P. It's a somewhat easy to do item according to our software developers, and it's ranked number 4 by users. That's one that we now are looking at more carefully and saying, hey, we might really think about doing that. It's a somewhat easy one, and it has a lot of purchase, a lot of importance for our users. et cetera, et cetera. There are just so many insights, and this has been a good chart to help guide the discussion. And if there's, a big ego in the room, like the big boss who has his or her priorities, this really brings data to bear. And perhaps for those individuals who might want to take over a meeting and say, hey, this is what we should do, it brings better data to bear and helps them, I think about things in a more balanced approach and think about other people's perspectives. So let's go ahead. Now that we've shown that case study, let's show how easy it is to develop a MaxDiff survey in Discover. Let's talk about electric vehicle purchases, and let's imagine that we have 6 items that we want to study. Brand name through acceleration speed, and I'm going to copy those items, Control C, and I'm going to go over to my browser. And in my browser, I'm going to type discover.sawtoothsoftware.com. That's our new cloud-based survey package that we're developing. And
hey, Bryan,
yes,
we're not able to see your browser.
Okay. Then let's see what could be the problem. The problem could be, what do you think? Do you think I need to go back and share again? Stop.
Yeah, maybe.
Let me go back and let me reshare my screen and see if that works.
Yep, now we can see it. Looks better.
Okay, so thanks for telling me. I type discover.sawtoothsoftware.com into this survey, into this, the browser. And then I log in with my email. And if you're not yet a Discover user, you would click Create an Account. And you can do this today and start using Discover and create surveys and field surveys with up to 50 respondents. You can do that today. It's a free trial with all of the features of the software, including MaxDiff, available to you. I click Next. And I'm going to create a new survey. I'm going to call it, just for ease, November 30th. That's today. And I'm going to go ahead and add to my survey a question or a survey element. I could add any of these standard survey questions, a single select or a multi-select or an open-end or a grid question or a ranking or a constant sum, skip patterns, quota control, etc. But what we're going to focus on today is asking a MaxDiff question. So I click that I want to add the MaxDiff question, and I copied my 6 items, so I'm going to Control V. I'm going to paste my items into here, and it shows me in real time what my question looks like at this point here on the right pane. Now I'm going to go back. I've got what we want to say in this question. Among these 3 features, which is the most important and the least important when considering an electric vehicle? I'm going to paste that into there. And this is what my question looks like. And right now, the software wants to ask 6 questions. By default, the software wants to show each item to each respondent 3 times, which is a really good thing to do. But if you want to, you can back that off a little bit and show each item 2 times to each respondent. If I were to show 4 tasks instead of 6 tasks, I could show each item 2 times to each respondent. And I'm just going to show you that I can override the defaults by clicking on this cog icon and going in. I've got to say that the best label is most important and the worst label is least important. I'm going to go ahead and click on this advanced button, because I know that I want to override the recommendation to show each item 3 times. I'm going to go ahead and show 4 MaxDiff tasks, which will make sure that each item shows 2 times. We calculated here for you and show that. If you want to do anchored MaxDiff, you can enable anchored MaxDiff. Many of you on this call know what that is for an advanced anchored MaxDiff study. I'm going to go ahead and close out of here. And I've got my study the way that I want it, and I might want to test. I might want to test the study, and I could quickly test the survey and make sure it looks good. But I'm going to go ahead and publish it. I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, yeah, this is my study. I want to get it up there on the server, ready for people to take. When you publish it, then you get a link that you can share with people. This link you could send out and invite people to take your survey. And I'm going to go ahead and take a live survey. Okay, this is live. I'm taking the survey. Now, obviously, I'd have a bunch of questions and text leading up to this point, and Discover can write your entire survey. You can use this as a general survey research tool, but we're focusing today on the MaxDiff questions. And let's go ahead and say that I think that driving range is the most important and price is the least important among these 3 things. And let's say that I think that price is the least important and safety is the most important among these 3 things. And reliability is more important, and then maybe brand name least important. And probably safety is most important, and no, maybe driving. They're all safe. Oh, golly, maybe driving range is more important to me. I think they're all safe out there. That we're doing a good job with safety on most all vehicles. So to break the tie, I would say that driving range is more important to me. And then I'm done taking the survey. What I can do then is go back to Discover. See if I can get back to the other screen. My browser is getting hidden by some of these controls that Zoom has up here. So
Bryan, just that second tab in, we can see it.
I can't see it. It's being hidden. It's being hidden. So I can't even see where to click because it's being hidden by some items that Zoom's putting up there. So I'm just going to go back in and log in again and go back to the November 30th project I have because I couldn't because my browser tab was being hidden up there, being covered by my Zoom controls. So here I am. Let's go over to data. Data shows that I've got 2 completes at this point. Oh, excuse me, that was the November 3rd. No, today is November 30th. Okay, so I've got 2 completes at this point. And we go to analysis. And it runs hierarchical Bayes analysis on my 2 completes. It looks like I had taken the survey earlier. And it says, hey, safety is the most important, driving range right next to it, reliability, and then acceleration, price, and brand name are less important. Now, this is just me, and I agree with myself, but when you have different people who have different preferences, you're not going to see such extreme drop-off in the sorting of these items as you saw before. And you can put confidence intervals on these things. You can go in and do turf optimization to total and duplicated reach and frequency optimization on your scores. But these are the scores that we take. We can show the table result. And these are the scores that you take into your quadrant analysis when you perform this for your customers. And then you also do it for your internal stakeholders. And that's what you plot on your XY scatter plot. So with that, I'm going to go back to our slides and wrap things up. So in terms of next steps and opportunities for you, I highly recommend that if you haven't taken a look at the Discover platform for writing general surveys and for doing MaxDiff, that today you go up to discover.sawtoothsoftware.com and you create a new account. It's free. You can use this, you can do as many projects as you want for up to 50 respondents per project. All the features of the software and the analytics are there. Nothing is taken away from you. And Discover can also do content analysis, CBC. So if you're interested in CBC, which is the multi-attribute extension of this type of analysis, to study, for example, brand and color and style and price and how to optimize these features and how to optimize pricing, you might want to take a look at CBC. And we have some opportunities for in-person learning. In January, if you want to join us in Orlando, Florida, we're going to be teaching a 3-day hands-on workshop covering MaxDiff CBC and adaptive CBC. That workshop is going to focus on our legacy Lighthouse Studio platform that I've been talking about. But we're going to spend a little bit of time also showing you how easy it is to use the Discover platform for MaxDiff and CBC projects. And then our big conference, May 1st through 3rd, the Analytics and Insights Summit, is coming up in San Antonio, Texas. We have got dozens of presenters on the program from various consultancies and corporate researchers around the world. 11 of the presentations are going to be on AI in marketing research. We're going to have a bunch of presentations on MaxDiff and CBC, both on the analytics side of the sessions and also on the corporate researcher side on the sessions. And Greg Allenby from Ohio State has a session that is focused on academics, and he has a lot of academic researchers professors coming in to give presentations on his. So I'd highly recommend that you think about coming to one of these events and joining us next year. With that, I thank you for your attendance and thank Justin for arranging this and Brian McEwen for answering your Q&A. You'll get a copy of these slides and a copy of the video in a few days. And with that, I'll turn it back to Justin.
Yeah, I just want to make sure you don't end it, Brian. We're going to answer some questions here.
Super, fire away.
One thing I'm kind of smiling about is, you did that survey and you did one respondent and all of a sudden there were 2 respondents and you're like, what's going on? One of our attendees, Manju, actually typed in the URL himself.
Oh my gosh!
And
it did confuse me. I thought, well, did I take this one earlier today? I have to admit, it did confuse me. So one of you guys fooled me and came in as a respondent. So thank you.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Thank you for explaining that, because I have to admit I was a little confused why there were 2 respondents.
It was really great. I wanted to add. We've done, Brian McEwen and I have done, and Bryan Orme, we've done presentations before where we actually make a MaxDiff survey in Discover and we send out the link to all the attendees and they take the survey during the presentation. And we were able to do that around Halloween with Halloween candy. Anyway, we were able to create the survey, collect responses from all of our people attending the workshop and display the results all in 4 to 5 minutes. So it's something cool that you can do that fast with Discover. Brian McEwen, if you guys don't know him, he's great. He's with us, product manager of Discover, and also has extensive experience with support. Brian, you were handling the Q&A. There were a few there that you might want Brian to answer live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Brian, jump on and answer some of those live.
So there's a couple questions. I wonder if you could cover how you approached your design for the case study. So you had 27 items, and how did you personally approach how the balance between more items and fewer questions, or fewer items and more questions? Some of the people were just curious why you made the choices you did on the design.
Okay, well, we had multiple years of this survey going where we have open-end responses, and obviously there's more things that people requested than this. And as we also looked at the support group, Christina's group, and they chimed in and they record, every month they record the things that people talk about and what they request. And that goes in an internal list. there were many more items than 27. And we internally got together as stakeholders, and it was me making a first cut and kind of showing what I was thinking. It was me bouncing it off Christina's group, but also off of the product manager. So there was some cutting that we did in terms of all the possible ideas that we, with our expert opinion, did. We wanted to keep it. We wanted to keep it somewhere around 30 items, although we would have been comfortable going up to 40 or 50 items with 160 respondents. The survey would have gotten longer though, and so we didn't want to make the survey much longer. It was a 4-minute survey as it was. But those are some of the things, considerations that we worked with.
And then was it right? You showed 3 options at a time in the survey?
Let's go back. It
Hey,
might have been it might have been 4.
Bryan, you may want to turn on your camera again.
No, it was 3. It's 3. We showed 3 at a time. We thought that the item text was long enough that we thought that it was perhaps a little bit taxing for the eye and for the brain to read 4 items, where some of these items were like a couple of sentences long.
Yeah. So, yeah, just to clarify that, although we have, nudges in the right direction, if you've got a defensible reason to not follow those nudges, like that's totally fine. So if your things are very wordy, then you might not want to show 4 or 5 at a time. Or if it feels nice and harmonious because you have 27 things to chop it up into 3 so that you can balance things pretty well, that's fine as well. One of the beauties of MaxDiff is that we don't need a perfect design. We don't need to show everything absolutely balanced. It's really nice when we do, and you want to make sure that whatever you're using is doing a good job at that. But you don't have to have a perfectly balanced design where everyone sees everything equally, and the method still works.
Exactly equally. I mean, it can be one-off. We're not talking about big differences in the count frequencies. We're talking about minor bobbles of +1, -1, this way or that.
Yeah. Another question I thought was pretty good. Someone asked that some of their stakeholders only want to look at the best and the worsts because that's an easier thing to wrap their brain around than scores. Do you have any suggestions for how you would introduce the idea of a score, help someone understand that these are some of the things that people do struggle with, is the relative nature of MaxDiff, the fact that a score of 10 doesn't necessarily have a concrete meaning. Do you have any tips and pointers for introducing the scores that come out from the regression analysis?
Kind of an intuitive way to me is to think about, just to say, hey, and it doesn't work this way, but it's pretty close to it. It's pretty close to this idea. So intuitively, you could say, hey, every time a person says that something is best, score it a +1. And every time that a person says that something is worst, score it a -1. And so you're either adding 1 or subtracting 1, or when people say that things are best and worst, and just go ahead and tabulate those up. And that's kind of a composite score of best and worst. It's like 1 step forward or 1 step back. And that gets you a composite score walking across the room. The farther you get across the room, the more important you were as an item because you had more steps forward than steps back. That might be an intuitive way of describing it.
Cool. What's your perspective on keeping the length of items consistent? Do shorter items perform better than longer items? I'll answer first. I saw one bit of research that showed that the longer items tended to score better than the shorter ones. And then a few months later, I saw some research that showed that there was a strong segment in a survey that showed this preference, but in a very strong way. And it turns out that was a bot segment where the bots were consistently choosing answers all throughout the survey that had the longest text in them. So I've not seen anything else that has specifically looked at item length. Have you seen anything, Bryan?
No, I haven't, but I'm glad that you talked about bots because bots are being programmed to answer MaxDiff questions because MaxDiff questions are regularly showing up in a number of survey platforms. More than just Sawtooth platform can do MaxDiff questions. So the bot writers are teaching their bots how to answer MaxDiff questions. And when they put in, when you've got those bots answering questions, you can't just simply look at the fit statistic coming out of HB because those bots are answering consistently using some sort of rule programmed into them. But if you run latent class analysis, which is kind of like cluster analysis and logistic regression happening at the same time, you can have latent class show you 4, 5, 7 groups of respondents who are answering similarly. And sometimes these bots will just pop out as a segment that's super consistent, but also super weird or super kind of, you can see what the rule that they're doing. So I hope no bot writers are listening because they might think of new ways to try to fool us, but to try to fool us and not get it and not pop out as a latent class segment. But latent class often will isolate and report those bots to you as a segment, and you can see that they're very consistent and they're doing something strange.
I would add, making the items clear and concise is important. And I want to remind you that you can have images as your items, and you can also add tooltips into your items. So if the respondent wants to learn more about something, they can.
Very nice.
Let's see. There's a question about coming up. How do you come up with the list of items? Are there any particular methods, any additional research methods that would be good for determining if something should make the cut to go into your MaxDiff? What comes to my mind is, again, just reiterating what we did. This was not a first round of research. Like Bryan said, we've got data from previous years.
A lot of open ends.
We have both MaxDiff data from previous years, but also open ends from surveys from people. And we really tried to make kind of this holistic view where we talked to our support team. What are people having problems with? We tried to get some insights from our sales team. What are people asking about when they're inquiring about the software and things like that, and then using some trimming internally from a small group of people. So I think qualitative is usually the best way to start off. Just start talking to people and see what things come up, and if those things come up multiple times, they're probably a good thing to think about prioritizing. So we wouldn't necessarily change the approach of like a product manager talking to customers or anything. We just think that getting your feedback through a MaxDiff exercise is just it just has so many benefits of preventing the ties and preventing scale bias, and every question is easy, but it kind of makes people think a little bit. You just get a ton of benefits for that part of things.
Yeah, well said, Bryan.
Also plug, Discover doesn't do this yet. You have to do this in Lighthouse Studio, but a lot of you on the call are probably familiar with Bandit MaxDiff. It's an approach where essentially we're trying to change our design on the fly. We're learning from respondents to build the questions of the next respondents. So if you had a big list of 100 things, you can run a Bandit MaxDiff exercise, and we kind of randomly sample at the beginning, but as we start to get signal from the data, some people seem to consistently mark certain features as important or best, and some things are consistently as worst. We start to adapt our design so that we ask about the good stuff more and we ask about the bad stuff a lot less often. There's a really fun paper on the website you can read if you want to email us in at support@sawtoothsoftware.com. We can share that link with you that shows that in that case, when you've got a big a big list of items, you can be extremely efficient if your goal is just to find out like what's the top 5 of this huge list, rather than doing a traditional MaxDiff where you're going to care and spend survey space equally among all the items. You can do it with about a third of the sample size with the banded approach. That's a lot of fun.
Hey, so I'm going to jump in here. I think we're willing to stay longer and answer every question, so we will do that. But for those of you that have to go to your next meeting, just want to remind you that we will be sending out a recording of this probably Monday or Tuesday of next week. If you want to watch it again and go over some of these this Q&A. Also, heads up, our next webinar is December 14th. It's entitled Getting Sample Size Right, What They Didn't Teach You in School. That should be a very interesting webinar. You can sign up to for that by going to sawtoothsoftware.com/webinars. And then just again, a little plug to check out Discover at discover.sawtoothsoftware.com. So we'll continue, but that was kind of, the wrap up, but let's continue to answer all of these.
Yeah. Bryan, have you ever seen anyone look into adding more than one MaxDiff task per page? I haven't ever seen that before. Have you?
No, I think more often is the idea to ask the MaxDiff question twice with a different context. Like, hey, if you were thinking about breakfast, what would you most like to eat and least like to eat? What about dinner? What would you most like to eat and least like to eat? And asking about the same items, but 2 different contexts. The paper was presented on that the last conference, and it was found that rather than showing best worst for 2 different contexts like breakfast and dinner, I think the researcher found that just showing best only, just doing a best only MaxDiff, if you're talking about 2 different contexts, and say, hey, what would you most like to eat for breakfast? Well, what would you most like to eat for dinner? And then you'd have 2 different MaxDiff scores, one for breakfast and one for dinner.
Yep. Let's see. There's a question. Any special considerations for doing this for a software startup? I've actually, when I was in the UK and we were setting up our office there, I did go to a couple of kind of those mixer type things. The biggest thing I found is that a startup doesn't have typically a startup doesn't have anyone with any sort of research expertise, which means they need to outsource it, but it's also hard to spend money on that sort of stuff when you're focused on just building the product. So there was 3 or 4 startups that I interacted with, and we basically said, hey, we'll run the survey for free if you give us the feature items, and maybe we figure out a way to do a webinar together or something. And it was the time commitment that was the biggest obstacle. Because as Bryan showed you, with access to a platform, it takes you minutes to build the survey. And then also finding people to answer the survey is also a challenge, again, with budgets and things like that. So that's what I would say, is that the startup would probably benefit greatly from robust research like this. It's just hard to find the time and the resources often to do it. Let's see. I think so. There's a question. Once you have importance weights, could you use them in a decision support tool to compare between alternatives? For example, use MaxDiff to determine the most important attribute for a location, then weight to compare between multiple location options. So is this just like getting a score for something and then independently trying to say, but we kind of did something similar to this, Bryan, when we were thinking about locations to place an office, where we thought about like location and closeness to universities and things like that. So I've not done anything where I've taken the scores and then kind of weighted them by a second alternate scoring.
I took a class in grad school from Dr. Huff, And Dr. Huff had spatial marketing models where he would frequently be called upon to figure out where to put the next grocery store in a city. And he would say, and his model was that and he would model, like as if they were separate agents, each block in the city and figure out how many people lived in that block and how likely they were to go to a grocery store, where the preference for the grocery store, the numerator was the number of square feet of the grocery store, or we could take the MaxDiff score as a preference score, and in the denominator was the square distance for how long it took to drive by car to the grocery store. And so I imagine if you had some sort of distance metric, if you're talking about how to weight different alternatives, if you're thinking in a spatial way, you would divide the preference of the item by how difficult it was to get to the item. Maybe that's distance to travel squared, or whatever you have in your denominator in your decision support tool that you're talking about. So I can think of a corollary that way.
Yeah. Cool. I think I might type just a little bit more into some of these, but I think that puts us in a pretty good spot, and we are at the hour.
Okay. This has been fun. Appreciate everybody, the 48 participants that are still with us. Anyway, and thanks, Bryan and Justin, for all your help.
Thank you, Bryan. We will talk to you guys later. Come to the next one. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.